Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us today for our event, Preparing Your MedTech Company for Acquisition, partnered with Orthogonal. So today you'll hear from Christian Johnson from Scout Medics and David Van Sickle who is our healthcare executive and strategic advisor. So before we go ahead and get started, I would like to introduce Randy Horton, who's the Chief Solutions Officer at Orthogonal. Randy, take it away.
Thanks, Kay, and thanks to our partners at Matter. On behalf of myself and Bernhard Kappa, the founder and CEO of Orthogonal, we want to thank you all for turning out today. We don't take it for granted that you have busy schedules and you could allocate your time many ways. So we're really pleased you've given us a little time here with this webinar that we're very excited about. As many of you know, I think Orthogonal regularly does webinars monthly or so, and Matter does webinars on a regular basis as well. We're both trying to really just bring best practices to the industry. So I think of today's session as kind of like one of those crossover sessions between multiple different Law and Order series or Chicago PD and Chicago Fire, because it's Matter and Orthogonal coming together to do a topic that's of mutual interest to sort of both of our communities that we work with. We're hoping that at a bare minimum, you'll leave here today with a handful of gold nuggets that are actionable and you can put to use. And hopefully you may even take away more than that. As Kay said, please send questions throughout. We are going to, Christian and David had a lot of content to get through. So we're going to probably hold back on questions for the first 60 minutes, unless one of the questions that comes in is like, I have no idea what you guys are talking about. Could you clarify something now before we go on? And then we really are looking forward to a lot of questions. The genesis of this was a conversation that we had with David earlier this year, where David said, I kind of get the feeling there's this perspective among a lot of MedTech companies that if you build a fantastic product, some big established strategic partner is going to just swoop in out of nowhere with a big check and write you a check and you'll have your exit and life's going to be great. And he's like, it doesn't really work like that. And he goes, in fact, you're really missing out on some interesting opportunities and important opportunities for your business if you kind of take that as your perspective. So we thought we'd bring David in here today to kind of share his perspective as a founder who's done an exit and now sitting on the other side of the table. And actually, instead of us just interviewing David, we actually brought in another close friend of Orthogonal's, Christian Johnson, he's going to primarily interview David, and I may interview Christian a little bit in return. Christian's got a deep background in MedTech. He's been global VP of product at a large IVD company. He was at Edwards Life Sciences doing strategy and marketing. He's also got a number of other ventures, including being a fellow at UCLA Biodesign. I don't think I can even get through all of them. You have a very full plate, Christian. And so Christian seems like a good person because he's been very much on the strategic side, looking at what startups should we invest in as a strategic company, or what startups should we look at or consider acquiring, and those kinds of things. So it's a bit of a two-way conversation, and I'll just kind of chime in once in a while. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Christian, who's going to take it from here.
Thanks so much, Randy. And I also want to thank and acknowledge the team behind Matter, as well as Bernhard for sponsoring and hosting this event. It is an absolute privilege and honor for me to get to dive deep today with David Van Sickle, who I'll introduce in a moment, because this is a very relevant topic for many of those I know who are joining us today. Whether you're an innovator, a founder, an entrepreneur, or you're sitting on the side of a health plan, an investor, a strategic, I really want to lean into Randy's television and movie reference with the crossover here. I think we have a neat dynamic of people who have gotten to sit on kind of different sides of the table, with today mostly focusing on David's experience and story and sharing those insights and lessons. And I just grateful to have the opportunity to kind of be the person on the other side of the table to interview you today, David, and help share and uncover that. So with that said, I'd love to kick off just by introducing David here. For many of us who are joining today, a large part of why we're here as it relates to preparing your MedTech company for acquisition is because of David's historic acquisition himself. David is known as the co-founder and CEO of Propeller Health and sold the company to ResMed for $225 million. But what I really want to also acknowledge is really his history and experiences leading up to that moment and where he is today before we dive in and he gets to share his story. So first today, David is acknowledged as a pioneer and innovator in the space of digital health and digital therapeutics, especially around chronic disease management and pharmacological therapy within the space, primarily focused throughout your whole career on respiratory health. You've really been a pioneer in respiratory health, advancing the field all the way back, starting with your research and your PhD out of University of Arizona, where your entire thesis and dissertation was funded by the NSF around asthma and also allergies in India. And that was really inspired by a lot of your prior work too, that you had done around that within the United States with various tribes. And that really took you on this unbelievable journey and path where throughout your career leading into Propeller Health, you also not only earned a PhD in medical anthropology, you were a Robert Wood Johnson Foundation Scholar at Wisconsin School of Medicine and Public Health, where you continue to dive deeper into your journey with respiratory health and medicine. You were acknowledged by the Obama administration back in 2010 as a champion for change for your commitment to innovation and the use of technology to advance the fields around COPD and asthma. And it really just it continues. You worked at the CDC in epidemic intelligence and surveillance, really stepping in and aiding in the surveillance and response around Hurricanes Katrina. And it's really quite profound. And finally, you're a founding board member of the Digital Therapeutics Alliance today. Following your acquisition of Propeller Health, you've just dedicated yourself to really giving back and providing strategic advisory, consulting, serving as a board member and investor in really the next wave of emerging ventures in respiratory health, some of which we may get to hear about today. And finally, you serve as a member at LifeArc Ventures, where you continue to engage in that and are a non-executive director at Closed Loop Medicine. Really just an incredible pedigree, but today I'm honored that we get to dive into your story with Propeller Health. Before we kick off, as a amateur ukulele player, I also just want to acknowledge it seems a shared passion for music as a drummer. Maybe following this sometime we can get together and do a little band jam session sometime. But for now, we'll focus on this jam session. We'll dive in. David, thanks so much for joining us. And I'd love to just kick off by passing the baton to you here, just to tell us your story from the founding of Propeller all the way through to acquisition, over the next 10 to 15 minutes.
Yeah, thanks, Christian, and thanks, Randy, and to the Matter and Orthogonal teams for having me here today. I'm excited to be here because I do think there's an opportunity to hopefully give back to founders and to executive teams who are in the arena, so to speak, today, trying to build companies, and particularly to dispel some of the like common sense views about acquisition, and hopefully to draw some lessons from what we experienced at Propeller. Three things that I want to try to cover today, or three messages that I want to try to communicate before we jump into the Propeller history. So I think they'll maybe help set the context for why the business grew up as it did. The first is that really the journey to acquisition is one that you can't start soon enough. So I'm going to hopefully encourage you all to be proactive about it, to try to build and accelerate momentum and influence today to get started. This is really about trying to catalyze a big idea in compelling owners' minds. And the sooner you get working and building those relationships, the better. And kind of we'll talk to how that worked at Propeller. The second thing is I think it really helps to have some sort of a framework for how you pull this off. And today, I'll try to explain a little bit about the way we approached it at Propeller, and whether you use that or whether you modify it or whatever plan you come to. I think it's really important to come up with some sort of a strategy for how you're going to control the outcomes and try to bring about behavior in those folks who you don't control, these big potential acquirers. And then the last thing is that these acquisitions are highly complicated and complex deals, and so they're kind of like mini miracles. It's amazing that they happen all the time, but on the other hand, if the deal is going to get done, I think it will come through. The point being, it's really important for you to find people who can support you. There's lots of sort of intuition and behaviors that you might think will make sense, but are actually counterproductive to a good deal, to increasing the probability of the deal getting done. So my third objective is to really encourage you to find people in the community, whether on your board or whether in corporate counsel, other ex-founders who can help guide you and help you avoid some unnecessary original thinking and hopefully maximize the odds of the deal getting done and it being a good one for you and the business and your team. Okay, so to step back, so Propeller was set up in 2010. We started the business as a spin out from the University of Wisconsin, as Christian mentioned. And it was pretty early days for digital health. And I think what's going to come through in the fundraising history and the growth of the business is some ambiguity and uncertainty about how we were going to commercialize essentially what was a clinical innovation. We're best known as a company for essentially connecting a person's medicines to the network. That is the daily medicine they took to try to prevent or minimize symptoms from occurring, and then the emergency or acute relief medicine that they took to help them get over symptoms quickly. So this is true in asthma and COPD, and those were the two conditions that we primarily focused on. Over the course of the company's history, we would raise about $70 million in venture capital and venture investment over 4 rounds. And one thing I want to highlight up front is how with each of those institutional rounds, we were very deliberately bringing strategic investors around the business. So not only were there traditional venture participating in those financing rounds, but for example, early on, Walgreens became an investor in Propeller. And at each turn, at each financing, a new crop of strategic investors would join the cap table. And essentially what that reflects is a desire on the part of myself and the executive team to explore whether there was a commercial partnership, whether there was a path to distribution, whether the Propeller product could be better monetized in collection with a product profile or portfolio that company had. So exploring the opportunity for partnering, exploring the opportunity for investment, and then creating an opportunity for the company to be acquired by bringing those strategic partners around the business. So it started out with Walgreens. We also were early on a partner of Dignity Health, for example, in the California Healthcare Foundation. So again, you can see the company, if you look back over our history, kind of exploring ways in which we're going to get our technology to market. How are we going to commercialize it? How are we going to distribute it? How are we going to monetize it? How are we going to try to drive engagement with it, both on the part of physicians and patients? That led to essentially a pretty complicated commercial model at Propeller, where we had on one side of the business sort of what I think of as the supply of digital medicines and respiratory, the pharma, where we were working with GSK or Boehringer or whoever to build a digital solution to connect their medicines to Propeller. On the other side of our business, we had sort of the aggregated demand. So try and think about like organizations where there's clinical risk and interest in trying to improve outcomes with chronic respiratory disease and lower the cost of care. Think like health plans and provider systems or PBMs. And in each case, we're trying to, over the course of these financings, we're trying to understand what the value of Propeller is as a sort of a pair with that partner. In the case of Express Scripts, for example, it became simply a distribution model. In the case of ResMed, it ultimately led to acquisition. So over the course of the company's history, you see at each financing event and in between, Propeller, me and the executive team out trying to interest the strategic leaders of those businesses to participate in the kind of co-creation of some viable pair with Propeller. How is our technology going to enable them to achieve some bigger, higher objective that they have set for themselves? So that moved to investment from pharma, like Hikma Pharma and SR1, the venture arm of GSK. That led to some investment from device manufacturers. So we realized at one point that there's another group of organizations like Aptar out there essentially manufacturing millions and millions of the drug delivery devices, and that adding connectivity to their business would be a really interesting step forward for them and enable them to increase the value of their offering. So they came onto the cap table and we built a commercial partnership there. Ultimately then in 2018, ResMed joined as an investor in Propeller, and this was in July. We'd also taken some investment from McKesson. So again, you can see us exploring opportunities through potential distribution through them. But ResMed joined in that round, middle of 2018. We started working with the business, and pretty soon after, I think there developed a quickly shared sort of a shared belief about the future and a strong sense of mutual trust that there would be something very valuable created coming together. And so soon after that, in August, I guess, of that year, there was kind of a conversion or an activation to a whole company acquisition, and we ultimately closed on that acquisition, or we announced it in the first week of December 2018, and then closed it about a month later, January of 2019. I then ran the business, Propeller, as a standalone entity for a couple of years, moved into an EIR role there after that, and then stepped aside to allow some new leadership at Propeller to come in with new energy and new ideas about how to grow that as part of a bigger company. So a long journey, but what I wanted to highlight is really the degree to which we were proactively trying to bring big strategics into the business and getting them oriented and accustomed to how we worked, where we were headed, but also making sure that they saw we thought of ourselves as a sort of an early embodiment of something that had a much higher, bigger purpose and value to it, that there were trends kind of happening across the market that would, in their arms, unlock a lot of value for them. And ultimately that, we ended up in a great home with ResMed. So Christian, hopefully that's good background for us to kick off today.
It's an absolutely outstanding background, David. Thanks so much for sharing it. I think it gives us allows us to start at the top, and we can dive a little deeper. Going back to kind of the 3 key points that you really want to leave everyone with, something that really struck me as you started talking about this story was the importance of kind of the shared vision and alignment with a lot of the players that you were engaging for investment along your 4 primary rounds. Could you talk about that a little bit? Because this, as you said, was at a time when I think digitally enabled devices and these platforms was kind of really coming into fruition. What did that process look like for you at that time? What was the importance of that alignment and vision and strategy with these companies that you think translated to the acquisition later on down the road?
Yeah. Well, it was a pretty different time. I think I was reflecting on this today and thinking about how back then Todd Park and that group at HHS were doing a lot to kind of build an ecosystem of digital that was really focused on data. And they were, I think, awakening a bunch of the industry to the potential value that new technology would offer their businesses. In the case of Walgreens, for example, there was and there has been a continued significant amount of innovation in what happens in the retail clinics. What do their digital experiences do, and how does data play a role in in their ability to improve the way they look after the health and the care and treatment of a bunch of people. So back then, I think there was a lot of interest in Walgreens leadership and how they might capitalize on that and build a business around chronic disease management, for example. And without even being able to really remember that far back, there was a lot of enthusiasm about that. And similarly, I think you saw, and we just talked about in the case of Aptar, device manufacturer looking at how they're contributing to the care and treatment of chronic respiratory disease and seeing an opportunity to embed electronics in all those millions and millions of inhalers that people are carrying around and using, and thereby kind of increase the value that they're creating for their pharma customers and ultimately then for their for the payers and the health providers, healthcare providers. So I do think what's important about it is that it's not like you're trying to bring your product, the Propeller product, all the way to market. You're trying to kind of catalyze in your strategic partners a big idea that they see kind of enough market forces and trends happening. You're trying to put enough pieces on the table that they kind of create in their head their own big narrative about where they're heading as a business, and how the piece that they're missing is you. So you're kind of operating, trying to increase your perceived utility at the same time, you're trying to increase kind of your perceived scarcity and make it seem like they need you to accomplish and unlock this, the growth in their own business. And therefore, it's really important to understand like how they're talking about their business and where it's headed, not just internally. What is the future of CPAPs look like, for example, in ResMed's case, but also like what are they saying to their investors, to Wall Street, and in our case, and how are analysts reacting to those statements, and what are the pressures that these companies are feeling? So one thing I encourage founders and exec teams to do is spend a ton of time listening to earnings calls. Show up to hear, in their own words, the leadership of your compelling potential owners talk about their business and where it's headed, and what kinds of visions do they have for how they're going to grow and increase their their market share or deal with new forces. And so that's just a simple way, but I think it's really important to underline. It has to be it's about a big idea, an acquisition, but it has to be their idea. You're just kind of a part of it. And it gets to some tactical things we could talk to in a little bit about how you pitch them.
Yeah, the strategic often has a pretty clear idea where on the horizon they want to go, whether that's create a new market, develop a new therapy, augment their existing portfolio. But in the cases when something as novel as Propeller comes along, there may be either you have a missing piece of the puzzle, you don't know you have a missing piece of the puzzle, but by the shared discovery that can happen by engaging Propeller and the education that comes in that discovery process, how do you plant that idea of a larger vision that the two companies can come together on, if I'm hearing you correctly?
Yeah, exactly, right? Startups are weird to sell because there's no price. There's no way to price it, right? It depends on the buyer-seller pair, the value. And so what you're doing is trying to build a relationship with a team, and that relationship also includes kind of a mental model of the value. And that's tied to what owning you is going to help them accomplish, what that's inherently quite a lot bigger than what you are. It's like a higher, bigger use of your tool and technology. And I think that's true at all sorts of points in a company's history. That can be true early on, that can be true later on. And so it's pretty important, I think, to kind of continually challenge yourself as an exec and as a founding team. Like, is this the time that we should really be thinking about this? And who are the compelling owners at this point? And before we raise the next round, absolutely challenge that and interrogate that moment and see if it's an opportunity, before the company increases in value, hopefully, or, takes on a different strategic direction. You got to make sure you're really interrogating the possibilities and looking for opportunities where you might be able to activate a person or a team that you already have a strong relationship with. That's why I want you to start early getting those things built, right? Yeah,
absolutely. And then as we work towards getting more of the specifics of the acquisition itself, something I want to go back to, which is your second key takeaway, your lesson that you want people to walk away with, that you and I have talked quite a bit about, related to starting early, is the importance of not only obtaining capital, but also what are the other things that as the venture you're trying to obtain throughout each of your rounds, and also the acquisition itself. Maybe if you could bring us through each of your rounds, what was it that you saw and you were looking for in collaboration or partnership with the Walgreens, with the Dignity, with others, that may even transcend beyond the capital alone?
Yeah, good question. So a few things, and maybe we'll take it kind of generally and then come to it specifically. I think there's three things that you should always be looking for. One's kind of around product and engagement. So is there something about what you have that could be better used or more valuable or more significant kind of as part of something more, holistic? And we can talk specifically about ResMed and how, their vision for a much more holistic end-to-end solution in COPD, we found very compelling and exciting, because that drives a lot of energy and excitement about a deal helps keep it going. Yeah. But coming back to that, so the product side and engagement, distribution is kind of the key thing. And if you think about kind of a company's history through fundraising, it's primarily accumulating capital, fundraising to fund distribution, right? And so that's one angle on it, and ultimately sort of why we felt like that the opportunity with ResMed was a really important moment to consider the next era evolution of the company. The last thing is around monetization, or is there a way for your product to be better monetized or be kind of more valuable as part of something else, something bigger? And that could be like a different like a suite of services. That could be who knows? I'm blanking on a good example, but I think about it in terms of how you monetize the business. And a lot of times these bigger companies already have their own customers and their own existing distribution and their own ways of monetizing products. And so one of the keys that we can talk about in terms of how you pitch these people is you really don't want to go in there with like too many questions answered or with everything answered. You need to go in kind of with leaving enough opening for them to kind of fit you into what they already have. If you go in like too prescribed, you're basically just kind of shutting yourself out. It's counterproductive. So to swing back to the Propeller case, and ultimately, how we ended up in the arms of ResMed, I think one thing we realized as we grew the business is that fundraising was taking up, and I think this is true kind of in the market generally, fundraising is taking up the vast majority of the energy and kind of attention that a company goes through to accumulate resources, right? Most of the time we spend as founders is trying to get investment in the business. But what we realized was that it wasn't really about that. It was really about trying to access the resources Propeller needed to grow. And that could be investment. That could also be like a cool distribution deal that got us way down the road. That could be whole company acquisition, or that could be some kind of crazy hybrid thereof, right? It could be an investment and a commercial partnership in distribution. And so I think, what you see is us kind of exploring those opportunities very opportunistically as the company grew up. We would go and we would talk to a pharma partner, because we saw there, like, it was kind of the era of beyond the pill solutions. I don't know if that rings a bell, but there was a whole wave of pharma trying to think about how to wrap services and data around their products. And so that was a pretty interesting, potential distribution opportunity for us, and interesting new ways of monetizing Propeller. And so you saw us kind of in there exploring and trying that, and looking for ways in which we could work with bigger companies, partners, through investment or through deals or whatever. So that's one example. In the case of ResMed, and this is true across MedTech in general, I think we realized that they had products that were way downstream of sort of diagnosis and treatment, and that in a lot of cases, these big MedTech companies had very valuable and clinically important products, but they really suffered in terms of market share and growth from a lack of like diagnosis and treatment. And so what we saw was an opportunity to help them kind of go way upstream and to become, champions of that category much earlier on in a patient's journey, so to speak. And so what we were trying to catalyze in them, and was their big idea that they'd been talking to the market about, like wanting to be, much more supportive earlier on in a patient's journey through sleep and respiratory care. And that included, at the end, being able to provide somebody with CPAPs or provide them with a ventilator. But along the way, they could essentially assemble like an end-to-end solution for COPD care that was, that started out very lightweight, became digital, early on, connected to them through their medicines and Propeller and so on, helped support the customers we had, and worked closely with those customers to expand that market, like pharma or PBMs or whoever. And so, the vision, I think, that we tried to get them to see was theirs, but it was really about, hey, with Propeller, that huge opportunity you guys have talked about to deliver kind of an end-to-end care, a full digital solution for COPD patients from start to end, is much more realizable, and it's much more valuable than just providing them with a ventilator at the end of their life. And so essentially it was an investment, and then that investment pretty quickly turned into, let's like start working on this vision together as partners. And that pretty quickly turned into, a view of our utility and also kind of our scarcity. Why would you leave this company exposed for a competitor to take? And then ultimately, a whole company acquisition soon after that.
It's absolutely fascinating. It really dives into what was going to be my next question here on why ResMed and why Propeller for ResMed, which I think you just very nicely gave us an introduction into, with that shared kind of formulation of a shared vision to really address the end-to-end journey for the patients that both companies wanted to impact and improve outcomes for. So with that, let's actually dive more into that. Let's start with the acquisition process itself. Can you help educate us about maybe getting more specific and tactical about when did you know it was the right time to pursue being acquired and selling the company, and what unfolded from that point on? Were you, as many do, engaging various buyers and soliciting deals, or just walk us through that journey all the way through through December?
Yeah, sure. Well, I think along the way, I'll try to highlight some things that I don't recommend also. But pretty quickly after ResMed joined the company, and as an investor, we had raised a financing round, and we were contemplating, because of pharma partnerships, commercial and otherwise, that we were contemplating expanding our operations to a whole bunch of new countries. And what we realized, I think, is best summarized as like kind of the futility of capitalizing the business to recreate a distribution and a commercialization infrastructure that a company like ResMed already had and was already an expert at. And beyond that, that would include, even kind of their facility at regulatory and compliance issues in all these markets, at like the logistics of getting hardware into those environments and into the hands of a patient and physician, and so on and so forth. There was just kind of this whole universe of things that we were going to have to capitalize the business through equity, sale to fund. And for what? Like we were already, we were already kind of well down the path, and it just didn't make a lot of sense to the team anymore to raise a bunch of money to do that on our own. Like we didn't really have a good explanation for why we would build that stuff. And I think that's an important thing for a company to realize. And it's something I'm not seeing enough founders appreciate early on. A lot of folks are coming to market and trying to recreate and build de novo these whole distribution, their whole distribution and commercialization infrastructure. And I don't quite get it when there's good opportunities to work with existing partners who have, a book of business and opportunities to help you much more quickly kind of get to revenue. I think in terms of ResMed's perspective on it, and I can't speak for the company, obviously, but one thing we were still consuming cash at that point, right? But what we had was momentum of a different type. And I think it's really important for early stage founders to appreciate this. Not so much about top line revenue growth. It's really about like almost case study level metrics. Like, are your existing customers like really engaged with your product, and is their use of it and their value of it going up, right? And so we were at that point in time, there was just a lot of momentum in the business, no matter kind of how you cut into it. And so for them, I think the opportunity to build, as we talked about, kind of this bigger solution, more comprehensive solution for COPD, hinged on their ability to get customers that we had, pharma essentially, right, or health plans and provider systems, who were excited about Propeller and growing in their use of it. And so I think it was a really important point, because you weren't buying us because we were going to be massively accretive to revenue, right? You were buying us with the knowledge that you had to still add cash to this business to make it successful and to realize that bigger vision. Well, I'll pause there and see if that makes sense, Christian.
Well, it certainly does. In fact, it's thinking of putting my hat on, coming from a strategic or a PE side. I'm kind of thinking of my own case that we went through that was a little bit of the opposite of what I'm hearing from you, which is we had the distribution network. We had all, the whole railroad system from regulatory and clinical and clearance all the way through to the buyers and getting that out. We were actually trying to move towards building innovative products in-house when there was already this like incredible collection of novel technologies and ventures out. And we had that aha moment, it sounds like you did, where if you can marry the two together, you bring resources and capital from one side of the table in the distribution, maybe the regulatory and clinical support, with the technology and the expertise that this team offers. That sometimes is a great marriage rather than either party trying to create success from the ground up, if I'm hearing you in that. So
yeah, exactly. And then there's a huge team component that we haven't really talked about, but it's like, am I excited about working with these people? I think that's probably reciprocal, right? Like, is this the energy of that team, and obviously there has to be expertise and experience and a shared vision, but it's also about like mutual trust and excitement about building that together. And both sides have to see the value in that ultimate goal.
What were the can you dive into that more? What, like ResMed, great example. You started collaborating more following the initial investment from ResMed. What were some of the learnings and takeaways along the way prior to the discussion on acquisition, where you were just really affirmed that the trust was there, that shared excitement and vision was there? Talk about that more.
Yeah. Well, from our side, the acquisition made sense really from the moment we met the team. Like we had a very kind of clear and intuitive and shared vision for what we wanted to accomplish. There's a guy named Richie McHale who ran the respiratory care business, and it was like, I don't know, it's like you saw kind of the propeller culture replicated at scale in him and his leadership. And there was something like just, I don't know, difficult to kind of describe, but you felt it and you knew like, oh, this is going to be a super exciting guy and team to work for. And he understands what we're trying to do, but he also sees how he can use what we've built to do something that we would take a lot longer to get to and probably would never even survive till, And so it was like this chance to jump way ahead to the future that I think excited everybody around the business. And you just wanted to work hard for the guy because he was so smart and such a compelling and lovely leader of the business. And so anyway, I think it was a great fit in terms of the team and the way we wanted to work like into the future. And I also think it just happened at the right time. And this is something I talk to founders a lot about, which is you got to keep like a check on your energy level. I don't know how else to characterize this, but at that point, I think Greg, my co-founder, and I were feeling like, man, like these are hard problems and we've been at them for a while. And we probably have a few good years left, but maybe not much longer. And we should be thinking about like how this company kind of evolves and what the next chapter looks like for the business. We need the team to end up in a great place. We want the company to like accomplish bigger and better things. We need new energy and leadership and new ideas to kind of take this to the next level. And so I think the responsible thing to do is to, start to reflect on that pretty early on and make sure that you've got like some runway in yourself to actually get to that end and to deliver on that, the value of that acquisition. Make sure you can stick around and actually realize the shared vision and potential of it so that people reflect on it in a positive way, hopefully in the future. Yeah, I'm not sure how I ended up telling you about that, but I think it's really important for founders to keep in mind because they're not often getting a lot of advice about that, right? Sometimes your interests don't align well with your board members and investors, but nobody else can bring kind of that energy and perspective. So it's really up to you to make sure you're paying attention to it and make sure that you are planning ahead and working backwards from that to when you actually need to, start the process.
No, it's an important aha moment and a real moment. We often in the start of a startup journey talk about like the founders agreements and founder discussion, but there's kind of this aha moment I'm hearing you say where there's another coming back to, where do we see this going and what's best for our company. And so I think with the acquisition in mind, like what did success look like for you going into the acquisition with ResMed or just an acquisition in general?
Yeah, it was like what we just kind of summarized as really finding a good home for the tech and the team, the platform, finding a place where we thought that what we had built could be like used to a higher, bigger purpose. In particular, we just couldn't see ourselves kind of capitalizing the business to go to far-flung parts of the world. It didn't really make sense. We obviously wanted to kind of shape the future, but we also, we realized and appreciated that ResMed had customers and they had ways of recognizing revenue and they had products. Yep. And so we tried to modulate kind of our product vision and our commercial plans for how we could actually help Richie and that team realize the vision for the respiratory care business. So yeah, I think it was mostly kind of this co-created vision for the world, if you will.
Yeah, it's very compelling. So can you tell us a bit more about we were talking a lot about team. Can you tell us more about the team and everyone who was involved in the acquisition itself on both sides of the table? And what's the cast of characters, just leaning into Randy's movie and television theme again? What's the cast of characters that are involved in this? Is it, a couple handful of people? Is it a wide village? And walk us through too the diligence and what, lessons you learned throughout that we should impart on, especially first-time founders and first-time acquirees here that are joining us today.
Yeah, I think an important thing to keep in mind, these are super complex deals, and therefore they have to be kind of solved both forwards from the thesis as well as backwards from the close at the same time. And to pull that off in a short period of time is probably the hardest few months of work I think I've ever been a part of. There was a very small number of people in the Propeller leadership team who were made aware of it early on. It gets a code name, and that's to protect the company from wandering off and spending its time, thinking about what vehicles to buy and stuff like that. You've got to continue to execute and deliver on the business. And the worst thing that can happen is for people to kind of lose focus in that moment because they get wind that something's happening, because these deals fall apart all the time, right? And so it's really important that the company continue to execute, and therefore you've got to protect most of the team from knowing about what's going on. And that means setting up all sorts of sort of obvious things in retrospect, but funny things at the same time to keep it private. So there's all sorts of meetings going on with the potential acquirer, with the consultants that they bring in to evaluate your business. And that can be financial, that can be commercial, that can be product and tech, and so on and so forth. There's an amazing amount of work that gets created for them essentially to try to reduce their risk in the situation. Fortunately, I had an incredible team at Propeller that I could rely on to help me get that done. We had on our side a whole range of supporting cast that included Alan & Co., who helped as bankers and financial advisors. That included Michael Esquivel and the team at Fenwick, who were corporate counsel to Propeller. And then Ethan Scarry at Fenwick, who was the M&A counsel for us. It also included employment lawyers just for the executive team and for the folks at Propeller who are going to transition to new roles, because your corporate counsel is not really looking out for you as an individual, so you really have to retain your own counsel to make sure that the employment agreements that are coming your way by the parent make sense for you and your team. That included additional counsel to support us on things like regulatory and privacy questions that came up in the process of diligence. It included outside tax people because there was different ways across the businesses of how we thought about sales tax, for example, which persisted actually and became an escrow item. So there's an incredible number of people helping, and the deal is really complex. And there's an emotional asymmetry that's really important to acknowledge to the founding team, to the startup. This is like the biggest deal and that you'll work on, right? And it's stressful and it's going to change your life and the company's life. And to the corp dev team on the other side of the table, it's like something they do all day long and have done over and over again. And so it's really important that you try to stay calm and cool and just work through the issues as they come up every day, because they will come up every day. I remember very clearly this one Excel sheet that we had that was tracking all of the diligence requests, and it was shared between the bankers and both parties and then my team. And because ResMed has a footprint in San Diego and in Sydney, overnight the items that we had crossed off on the diligence sheet would flow off, but then there would be a new set of diligence items that was created. And so it was just like this, it was like the magic porridge pot that just continually created more diligence. And the thing is, you have to figure out how to stay enthusiastic and energetic about knocking those down, because anything else is just self-defeating and likely to injure yourself in the deal. So it's really important to have a great team who can just chip away at those, each of those items and make sure that they're getting answered and addressed quickly and comprehensively and in a compelling way, and not lose their cool and not get frustrated by the process, because it's literally just a game of inches and you're just kind of moving through that, trying to get to burn those all down and get to a place where the deal can close. And all kinds of crazy things will emerge in that process that you hadn't forecast and that don't really make sense. But it's important to just, I guess, just keep the perspective of where you're moving to and make sure you don't freak out and lose the plot that late in it.
Yeah, it's a really fascinating insight, because as you mentioned, on one side of the table, and I've been a culprit of this myself, it might feel like a game of hungry hippos sometimes, where you're always trying to look at what investments to make or what to acquire, and on a daily basis, it's very not routine, but there's a certain mindset, whereas being very conscious and acknowledging that for the founding team and that company, they're looking for a new home, and it's really important to be conscious of that. And I'm oversimplifying, of course. But as you went through this process, and thank you for sharing that, what surprised you the most that you didn't anticipate as a first-time founder going through this experience?
Oh boy, so much. A few things quickly to share. One, I think it's really important to think about these deals as entrances rather than as exits. This is about kind of access to resources. This is the framework kind of that we use at Propeller. This is about we viewed it not as a sequential path from like building a product, doing commercial deals, and then acquisition. It was more like, let's do all those things at once. And it's really an entrance to kind of the capital and a relationship that you need to grow the business. Some of the other surprising things, I think, what I see today, at least, are a lot of companies using sort of their investor pitch or a product kind of sales pitch to try to get a partner. And I really strongly encourage them to revisit that and to try to use a deck that doesn't present the company or the product as complete. So remember, you're trying to catalyze this view of the world and you as a part of a bigger puzzle and an opportunity. And so if you're precluding conversation and you're precluding thinking, if you have all the answers and all you need is cash, or you just need them to sign up as a customer, you're kind of cutting off the opportunity for them to create a vision of the future with you as a part of accomplishing something bigger. So the deck is really important, and how you present yourself as a company shouldn't be something that's complete, in my opinion. It should be something that's partial and needs them, whether it's their distribution or their other resources to get to to value. What else was surprising?
Well, you shared, if I may, you shared one with me yesterday. I thought was I'd never heard of before. It was more like a nail in the road down the yellow brick road of this process, but related to computer. I don't know if there's something around that that's kind of something you never anticipated you'd even be shuffling around to figure out.
Yeah, what we were talking about yesterday was just how at the end, like little things, and this is related to this previous point we were talking about with diligence, little things can become big issues. And in our case, we had a laptop that had gone missing, and we weren't able to verify that the system that we use to control and to erase laptops, the remote system, that instruction had been received and acknowledged by the laptop. And so it became a pretty big point of discussion, because the potential liability in terms of the information security, even though we sent a command to wipe that laptop, and we were fairly sure, since it had been years, that there was nothing even in the first place on the laptop that would be of concern. But anyway, it became a pretty important item. And again, you can't throw up your arms and complain about this. You have to just solve the obstacle together. And the more you have kind of that shared trust and vision as a selling team and as a buying team, the better you're able to get through those kind of challenges. And that's why I think it really is about teams, right? And about the people, and the people are buying the company in a way, but there's a whole bunch of machinery around them to look for things like a laptop there where the acknowledgement of the wipe isn't in the server log. And what does that mean? And what are the implications of that? So little things can cause a lot of work. And you just have to approach that in a positive kind of untangling way.
Yeah.
The other thing I think it's important to highlight in terms of expectations and surprises, I think, and what people are doing wrong, or not wrong, but just suboptimally, in my opinion, they're like trying to rush to get to a term sheet and to get to almost push to get a deal done. In my opinion, that's like the exact wrong way around. Remember that you're getting a term sheet, and that term sheet, if you're pressuring the potential acquirer, is going to lock you up, right? It's going to prevent your company from talking to other potential acquirers. And so it commits the company, the seller, but it doesn't do anything to increase the earnestness of the buyer. And so you've essentially put yourself in a pretty tough situation where you've gotten a letter, you've signed up for exclusivity provisions, or no shop, and you're really not able to do anything. And yet at that same time, you're not able to really, all kinds of things could go wrong on the buyer side that would ultimately scuttle the deal. And these things fall apart for all sorts of reasons. So in my opinion, like rushing to get to a term sheet is kind of the worst thing you should do. The much better thing is to get a bunch of potential acquirers as far down the path as you can. And then at the very end, get a term sheet, close, and and exit, right? There's just, otherwise you're getting bound, but they're not. There's nothing kind of in those terms that are actually compelling, the potential parent to actually do work, to validate their interests, to get the executives aligned, you name it, right? There's all sorts of things that could go haywire there. And then if it falls apart and you get that horrible call, like, hey, thanks anyway, we've had a change of priorities, or, what COVID's happened, we're shutting down, they're out. And you now are, you've got sort of this weird story where you had someone who was looking at the company and had you locked up. Now they're gone. The rest of your potential acquirers are like, hey, what went wrong there? Did they find something that, wasn't promotive of them moving forward? Like what's the story? So I think you're doing yourself a disservice by trying to rush to get to a term sheet, and that's not advice you get very often. But anyway, that's
it's great advice to share, and to the degree that you can, knowing that today you advise and work with a lot of startups throughout this process. From a terms and conditions perspective, what do you see as kind of the ideal favorable types of terms that entrepreneurs should be thinking about going through this process, whether commonly advised today or maybe might be counter to what is common belief?
Yeah, I think maybe the most important thing to call out is how complicated so-called earnouts can be. So a lot of times an earnout is where, you know, some percentage of the deal consideration is held back pending accomplishment or performance or, you know, some set of milestones or achievements. And I think what gets overlooked is, again, these are already complicated deals, and now you're complicating kind of the future and setting yourself up for all sorts of potential disagreements and frustration down the road, where in a lot of cases, you lose control of the resources you have to deliver against those milestones. And so I try to encourage founder and exec teams to think about, you know, trying to minimize that or avoid the earnout, and try to do as much around an upfront consideration as possible, just because I think it's just a lot cleaner and a lot more simple than trying to anticipate complexity out in the future. And a good example would be, you know, in the last couple of years, man, COVID happened, and that changed, you know, overwhelmingly the priorities of ResMed for very good reasons, right? We had to suddenly make a lot more ventilators to support for life support, right? And so that's an example of, if we were tied to you know, performance metrics or achievement of some revenue target, but yet the whole company shifted to delivering against a very compelling promise, or and pledge to the community and, you know, to the bigger business. Like, who can blame them for it going astray? But so that's why I encourage others to try to solve for just the deal is what it is, and try to keep as much out of the future as possible, and to just make it as simple and straightforward as you can.
Yeah, there's a blessing in that simplicity when it comes to complex arrangements. Beautiful. Well, Dave, thanks so much for diving in deep with me on this. I think now, as we're hitting the top of the hour here, we got another 30 minutes part of the programming before we can go into the virtual networking sessions for those who want to stay on and go in. I know we have already some great questions that have come through from those who've joined us today. Perhaps if we could bring back Randy from Orthogonal to help share along some of these questions. And now to the audience joining us, really highly encouraging you to share along any questions that are top of mind. I think we're an open book today. So I think with that, Randy, I'll pass the torch back to you, and where I see I can speckle in some more along the way too.
All right. No, sounds good. We've gotten a bunch of questions in through a couple of different channels here, including some people reaching out to me directly on my phone. So one question that kind of came up was, I'll put a little context on it. The New York Times had an article recently talking about a large tech player. I won't name whom. And they said, if they come calling on your health tech business, run, because they're here to steal your people and your ideas and leave you. It's sort of the nefarious angle. Are there strategics that you avoided based on reputation, or that you got bad vibes from, so to speak, that you didn't know if they were really on the level? You talk about that.
Yeah, for sure. but I don't think it's going to make sense to go into them. I do think if you're one of the reasons I hear from founders for not doing strategic conversations earlier is they're concerned about people stealing the business idea. And from my perspective, if that's like a legitimate concern, then you probably need to work on the quality of the business. Like, there really shouldn't be something there that's so easily replicable by a big company that you're worried about sharing them with it. And if there is something there, I think big companies are pretty darn smart about their capabilities and their lack of them to create compelling innovation. Christian, you probably have a better perspective on this, but I don't think being scared of having ideas stolen is like a legitimate reason not to try to build relationships with potential strategics.
Next question, I'm going to roll a couple together. People kind of marveled at your success with, the quality and quantity of your strategic partners, and said, how do you even get started with that? Like, how do you connect with Walgreens or ResMed? Or to the question you made before, how do you find the right person in that organization? How do you get the intel you need? Like, you make it sound very easy.
Well, it is your job. I mean, to be blunt, right? And there are ways to figure out who's who in organizations. I think there's cool tools now that there's like this one I was checking out yesterday called the org that basically just shows you an org charts of companies. So I love that part of the business. I loved being out and trying to build relationships with people and to make sure that they had this developing understanding of what we were up to. And in every meeting that we went to, I was trying to be there to share with them a vision about where we were going and where I thought the business was going and where their business I thought was going, probably to an annoying extent, honestly. But so I don't know. I don't, what's the right way to frame this? I think your job from early on is to get out and to build relationships with people and to think hard in the beginning about who's a compelling owner of your company, and then just to simply like track them down and to figure out ways for them to make them aware of what you're up to and what you're building. And then you've got to, I mean, it is a lot more like crowded, I guess, and more dynamic today. So I don't know, maybe it was like a period effect on what we were doing. But I think if you actually commit to doing that, I think it's achievable. I think you can cut through and get on the radar screen. That's kind of what your role is, in my opinion, as an exec.
Make it so.
Make it so.
All right. Next question. This was an interesting one. In terms of, aside from the founders, what part did your existing institutional investors and venture capitalists or smart money play in the acquisition decision?
Good question.
Yeah. Obviously they're investing for home runs and not necessarily a $200 million acquisition. So how do they look at this and what role do they play?
Well, this is where I think
today, given the paucity of capital out there, how do you take that into account?
Yeah, I mean, in my scenario, I had amazing investors around the business, and granted, I guess 225 wasn't a home run, but for them, and at that point, it felt like a great opportunity for the business to grow into the next phase and for everyone to make money and to be excited about the next chapter. I don't think you always get advice from your investors that's well aligned with the founder's perspective, and that's why I encourage teams to reflect early on about like what do they want to do, right? And how far do they want to go? How much risk are they willing to put on the table? How much time are they willing to commit? Because and there's a post that should be read by everybody. It's Bryce's post called "Meaningful Exits for Founders." It's basically like, man, pay attention to what you're doing here, because at some points you can be raising capital and your exit scenarios are changing pretty radically. Like your cone of potential acquirers is getting smaller as the valuation of the company goes up. That's just adding risk. That's definitely adding time. And you need to be aware, not that everything is about whether the founders are going to exit rich, but you really need to be aware about how you're going to come out post another round. And you could be in way worse shape as a founder or as a kind of commons, the shareholders. And I just don't think people are getting that advice from their investors who are looking for, in some cases, exits and outcomes that look quite a bit different from what could actually be pretty meaningful for the founder team.
Christian, anything to add there on that one?
Sorry, I was actually priming for the next question here that I saw that I think helped give some context to the discovering and cultivating the relationships piece. So sparingly. David, I wanted to bring this one that somebody said, just if you can help create some clarity here. What was the initial engagement? How did you even come across engaging with ResMed in the first place with that initial investment? Was that through your network? Was that reaching out to their corp dev? What did that look like?
Yeah, boy, we were... Okay, I think I'm going to remember this accurately. I think we met them initially at JP Morgan. And so what we always tried to do this at JPM, essentially meet with as many potential partners as we could during that week to build, obviously to get some kind of rapport with an individual but also to try to understand. And we would go to their sessions and hear their executives talk about what the business was up to, how it was doing, hear what analysts had to say and ask. And so I'm pretty sure we met Hemant Reddy at JPM at one point early on, or relatively early on, and then just built a relationship with him and ultimately with Richie. So it was essentially just kind of a pretty standard BD effort that we would do kind of every year at the outside that meeting, to try to get to know people who were kind of on our list of potential acquirers, places where we thought we could easily end up.
Thanks. And from what could you just provide everyone with context on too, like what was the duration of the M&A process once you kick that off with ResMed? When did that start? When did that end?
And also somebody asked a complimentary question, which is how long did you talk to them before the discussion about acquisition started?
Yeah, well, we talked to them, I would say, for I can't remember if this is accurate or not. It was either we met them at that JP Morgan. I think the round that they joined was in I'm gonna say like the early, or maybe early summer of 2018, something like that. So I can't remember if we met them that in January at JPM that year, or if it was previously, like in 2017. I think it was previously, but then nothing really happened, and then kind of we renewed it through outreach and harassment, basically. Anyway, they came in in that financing round. That was I think April or May, and then we essentially got a letter from them in August, and then we worked to close in December. So it was a pretty quick turnaround, whatever that is, I guess longer than that, 4 months to close. And so during that time, though, from investment to when the letter came, we were working a lot. Like we were prototyping ways in which Propeller and ResMed products could work together. We were trying to present them with a vision for what a COPD solution could look like, again, leaving a bunch of it out because we knew they had their own ideas about what it was going to look like. And so we didn't want to prescribe too much. We wanted them to say, oh, this is cool. And, it fits with these pieces fit with kind of our bigger vision. And so, you're trying to get them to co-create, but also kind of make it their big idea using your little component pieces. So that's what we were doing from the close of the financing to when the letter came in. And obviously, most importantly, just working with them, like being out in San Diego, getting to see what the culture is like, them getting to understand our teams and how we work, them being able to see how fast we could do stuff, what the quality of our work was like, right, and so on and so forth. How much fun are we to hang out with? How much do we share a vision about how the med tech world, health tech world is, what direction it's going? Like it's all in play, right? And like arrogance is deal killer. Like humility is kind of endearing. Enthusiasm is what like accelerates deals and helps influence and get them done. So you just got to have, again, like ideas and all that stuff. Tech, it's important, but man, it's just ultimately about how good you hire, and like the quality of my exec team through that and through the whole course of the company was just killer, was world class, and that's what ultimately I think gets stuff done.
David, if I can just build off of what you said with respect to the importance of that energy, that charisma, that people being fun to work with. We have a question here from someone who has experience going through this themselves as a 2-time exited founder. And I like this question because it's kind of where the seat you're in now, really advising entrepreneurs and startups. They're having a tough time convincing these startups to really invest in the relationships that they're building. I think maybe whether it's coming from internal drive and pressures as the founders, whether it's coming from a board, there can be a lot of angst to ensure you're bringing and securing and closing deals or achieving certain milestones, or trying to get to that term sheet, as you mentioned, versus really honing in on the relationships that are being cultivated. How do you approach that with the assortment of companies that you now engage with today and advise?
I haven't had that scenario directly. I will say that what I'm confronting is startups thinking that they need to build everything like from scratch. And I guess in some ways that's kind of the same problem. They think that they need to own everything about distribution, and rather than thinking about how what they've built could help XYZ company deliver a more compelling portfolio at a higher price to bigger, better customers, or might help them accomplish new customers that have had on their list for a while. And so ultimately, I think that's about the same kind of energy, right? People not willing to build relationships, and I'm not really sure where that comes from. It's like they want to do everything on their own, and I maybe that's just kind of like wrapped up with some weird founder sparkle pressure or something. Like they feel like a need to demonstrate that independence and autonomy. I don't think that's optimal. Obviously, I think you're much better off viewing, kind of assuming. I mean, I guess back up. I guess there are people for whom they're going to go all the way and they're going to IPO and so on, and they're going to build everything themselves, and that's an amazing outcome and an absolute rarity. And so, what I would advise them is, hey, odds are if you're gonna equity return here, this is most likely going to be about acquisition. And so acquisition is about very quickly and early on starting to build relationships with the potential partners who are going to be the most likely acquirers. So figure out what those relationships can and should be, personally and business-wise: distribution, commercialization and monetization, investment, whatever it is, some hybrids. And so I would just keep pushing them down that path. And maybe that company just hasn't had that experience yet and hasn't realized how much their business will accelerate by virtue of those things. So maybe it's just something that needs to kind of fall once and then will be easier to address later in that company's process. Or maybe it's just some weird personality thing. Who knows?
We've got a series of questions here that are related, that are really, it's actually pretty timely considering we're coming up on JPM week, but isn't it awkward to approach potential partners at JPM to talk about an acquisition? Can you talk about how to leverage JPM? How did you build these initial relationships? How do you hunt down those people? And how important are trade shows or cold calling to building relationships? So there's a smattering of different questions there.
Yeah, dang, I'll do my best. Hey, I don't think you're approaching these people about acquisition. Hopefully, you're going there. You're like, the right way to, in my opinion, the right way to set this up is like, hey, we're a startup and we're looking for ways to grow, right? And there's lots of ways we can grow. We can get investment, and that's kind of left to our own. We're going to raise, equity financing. The natural history of this business is we're going to grow and do it ourselves, and so on and so forth. But we're opportunistic and we're open to ways of working together. You're not going in there to say, hey, my business is for sale, like we'd be great in your arms. It's more like, hey, we have this product and we see that, you, Mr. Parent, had this big vision, and we think kind of with our product, you're going to be able to do X, Y, and Z and accomplish that. And it's going to create a ton more value for you and unlock, the strategy you've been telling the bankers at JPM about, and so on and so forth. So you're not explicit about acquisition. You're explicit about your company being opportunistic and getting the resources it needs to grow. And that could come in the form of partnerships. That could come in the form of investment. That could come in the form of them buying the whole company. But yeah, you're just not for sale, right? You're just looking for ways. You're just looking for what you need to get to the next level. So I wouldn't go into JPM or any meeting with that. You will get asked questions like, well, long term, like, what are you thinking? And I think you just say, we're open, right? We're willing to do and consider all kinds of things. And that could be a spinoff with cash from you. That could be an investment. That could be some sort of arrangement. So I would encourage that person to not think about it as like hanging a shingle on the business, but like trying to build a relationship where that company appreciates that you see where they're headed, where the market's going, that they see that you're going to help them realize that with what you have, and you let that kind of conversation about acquisition emerge organically from the discussion about how you're otherwise going to work together to create value. Christian, what do you think? Is that on target, or how would you view that?
I love it. You know, it's interesting. I was just thinking about how, without disclosing the company's name, but a strategic, they actually changed the what they called their discovery teams or their corporate dev teams that were looking at us to like exploration, because that's a big part of this when you're engaging with these startups, really just affirming that there's an exploration that's underway. You're exploring synergies, you're exploring opportunities to collaborate, exploring growth, and the strategic might be in a position, or the PE firm, or whatever, whoever the potential player is, to help nitro boost, to help scale, to contribute something through a share of IP, whatever that is, and not to be too lazy. There's a balance between being super laser focused and, you know, saying no to anything that's not, you know, with that arrowhead strategy you come forward with, versus the kind of at least expressing that open-mindedness to explore and engage. And that may lead down the path of maybe there's not something here for us, but at least we have the opportunity to do that discovery on both sides of the table and leave it at a good point.
Yeah.
I think we're getting pretty close to wrapping up here. Couple of questions that are very specific that I would actually suggest probably we defer to the follow-on session, because I just don't know that they're going to be of interest to a wider group of people. So I think the last major one I see here is it was two related ones. One is about acquired employees, you know, of the team the team that was part of the acquisition. How many were offered to stay with the company? How many were left out? Are there incentives for staying with the company? And I'd throw on the other side of that, which is presumably the point of an earnout is to incentivize the founders not to disappear the day after the transaction is done. How do you provide reassurance if you're trying to minimize an earnout that you're doing it for the right reasons and not the wrong reasons?
I think predominantly it has to be about the shared vision, right? It has to be about enthusiasm for that goal and for working and as a part of that team. But ultimately, there are technical ways you can structure that don't look like an earnout. That they can be just retention bonuses or what have you. RSUs. Hopefully, you'll get good counsel in how to structure that. Those aren't. I mean, I think hopefully those aren't unusual. I will say in the Propeller case and generally, like, hopefully most of the team, if not everyone, is going to stick around. And in our case, for the overwhelming majority of Propeller employees stuck around for a couple of years. We did have, and I've been thinking, a lot about this, but we did have on the ResMed side, that company, a lot happened after we were acquired. Obviously, COVID happened, most importantly, and so in a big public company like that, things can change. That mean that priorities, get adjusted, and so, it's really important that when you're thinking about retention of the team, that everybody kind of, pretty quickly then, the company, the acquisition gets announced, and suddenly the whole team knows what's happening, whereas before only a tiny portion of it did. And so it's really important to invest in that moment and to make that a very like a positive experience. So in our case, a whole bunch of the ResMed leadership came to Madison, and a bunch of them went to San Francisco, where we had another office, and we celebrated that opportunity and marked it as the start of a journey together. And we just had a pretty strong and dominant culture at Propeller, and I think that was part of the attraction. It ended up, I think, persisting for most of the time that I was there, despite kind of big macro things changing, the overall context. So it is important. There's basic things you can do from an employment perspective and from consideration perspective to make sure people feel rewarded for that effort, to feel excited about what's happening next, to make them feel comfortable with the transition. And that all kind of, in some ways, ResMed is really good at that stuff. Big companies are really good at that stuff. They go through these acquisitions all the time, and they understand how to make people feel welcome and excited and so on. And it's incumbent on Propeller to do the same thing, or whoever, the seller, to do the same thing. So I don't know, hard to go into details about that stuff kind of publicly, but hopefully hopefully the rest of the team feels like I did and do, that it was a great place for the business to end up. And, there was lots of opportunity ahead for people to build, the next stage of their own career there.
Right. David, Christian, thank you both for great questions, insightful answers, good thoughts, candor about the gray areas out there. We've gotten some positive feedback comments here. And I think with this, we are going to, well, we'll remind everybody, yes, the video of this will be going online. You'll have a link. You can watch what you missed or share it on, please. And then we're going to hand it back to Kay, who's going to give us some final instructions for those who want to hang around for the virtual networking.
All right. Thanks, everyone. Thank you to our speakers. Thank you to our audience. We hope you have a great rest of your day and your year. This is our last Matter program for the year, so we hope to see you in 2024. All right. Thanks, everyone.